Hello, everybody. I welcome you all to the week 2 of devtoberfest 2023. I believe you are enjoying this fest so far. It is a celebration for developers by the developers. I am Rekha Diyar, a developer advocate at SAP. I will be hosting the session. This is week 2 of low code, no code learnings. The topic for today's session is what's new in SAP Build Process Automation. Before we start, I would like to highlight this for our attendees that you can earn 300 points for attending this session and answering the question related to this session. So, to be clear, there is not one, but 10 grand prizes, meaning 10 devtoberfest contestants get to win the grand prize worth $5,000. So, what is the grand prize? An all expense paid trip to SAP's Newport Beach office in California, USA, and a VIP experience at one of the area's major tourist destinations. Isn't that fantastic? A link to the devtoberfest group is in the description and in the chat box. Now, I would like to invite our Build Process Automation expert, Robin Kivitt from SAP, to introduce himself and start this session. Please take over, Robin.
Thanks a lot for the nice introduction and welcome everyone to the devtoberfest. My name is Robin Kivitt and I'm a product manager for SAP Build Process Automation. And I'm delighted to show you today what's new in SAP Build Process Automation from the last couple of weeks. And I'm also very much looking forward to the Q&A afterwards. And without further ado, because we do not have as much time, I would like to start my presentation today with a short look onto the agenda. So the 4 topics I plan to talk about are subprocesses within SAP Build Process Automation, why we build them and how you can deploy them for your own use cases, custom variables, a feature that will be coming soon this week, UI5-based user tasks, and principal propagation, or if you look into our help documentation and into the application run step on behalf of. If there's more time, we could also look into additional features, but let's see how fast we are. So let's start with a short scenario description. I thought about a use case that is also devtoberfest themed so that we all can relate onto. So devtoberfest, as I hope you have experiencing it so far, is an exciting and important online SAP event. And as an employee, I myself, I wish that there was also an on-site event in Munich where the actual Oktoberfest is happening, which speakers like myself and other employees can attend and qualify for. So since I'm a product manager for SAP Build Process Automation, I'm asked to define an exemplary devtoberfest event and travel approval process to discuss my proposal with the devtoberfest team for next year. Luckily, I do not have to start from scratch, but I can reuse existing processes that are already deployed and run within my company, namely an event application qualification process and a manager travel approval. So let's take a look into how my colleagues used the features that I just mentioned, custom variables, UI5-based user task, and principal propagation in their processes to run them, and how I can leverage them to implement my process to qualify for devtoberfest with the speed of low code, no code, and with SAP Build Process Automation. Let's take a brief look into why did we build, or why do most workflow management and process automation tools do have and support sub-processes. It's an important feature to modularize your business logic, like with any other application development. This will help you to enable reuse across your process landscape, and it also increases efficiency and consistency within your development process. Also, it improves the readability of your process models, which you see process models can become quite complex fairly quickly, and this is a best practice that we would recommend everyone to follow. And also, in case you have already been looking into the feature, we do not only have our no-code processes, but we also support our pro-code workflows that you can deploy from SBAS. In case you're looking for some helpful resources after the session, I listed some here. But let's deep dive now into our scenario. For this, I've already prepared an example project that's already deployed. And if we take a look into our parent process, which I called devtoberfest, you will see that this process consists out of a trigger form, and 2 sub-processes and the email notification in the end. Let's take a quick look into the request form, just so we get an idea what kind of information is being exchanged throughout the process. So first and foremost, we want to gather some information about our requester with the first and the last name, employee ID, and then we ask the applicant that wants to travel to Munich and participate in devtoberfest on site to maintain an application text. But also it's important for the manager's approval later on that the travel dates and the destinations, as well as some travel expenses, are maintained, for which we added a table here consisting of a column of type string, or to be more precise, a dropdown, and a number column here, which is calculating the costs in euros. Going back to the parent process, you see that we already divided the parent process into 2 sub-processes, which keeps this model fairly easy readable. And if you just take a short glimpse into this sub-process here, you will also immediately understand what I'm talking about. So we will take a closer look into the sub-process in a minute, but you see this is already quite complex and not as easy to read in case I'm not zooming in. So this is one of the reasons why you should be working with sub-processes. And again, this process was already existing in the company to kind of qualify for any event application. So I just added the sub-process here. And on a very high level, this is a 2-step approval process. And after the event qualification has happened, in case the sub-process has a positive outcome, has been approved, we will send the information to the applicant's manager, who will need to approve the costs and also, so to say, the travel dates for the applicant. And then only if both have approved, then the applicant can travel to devtoberfest. So as I mentioned, we don't only talk about sub-processes today, but also about custom variables. And I want to show you one first use case, what you can use them for. So as you see, we do have a condition logic here with a condition, or in BPMN, an exclusive gateway. And at some point here, we merge the branches back together. And we just want to use one mail activity in the process to notify the requester about the outcome of his or her application. So one limitation that we had in the tooling so far was that we did have our concept of input and output mappings that you're probably already familiar with. So each activity has inputs and outputs that you need to map in order to ensure a consistent data flow. So if we navigate into the manager travel approval process inputs, you would see the list of inputs, and that all the inputs are mapped basically to the outputs that are provided by the request form. And as an output of this process, we do have a variable that we call approval outcome. And we also do have the same variable here in the application, the event application qualification. So in the past, and as I said, the future will be released very soon, we would have had 2 outputs for the same. We would have had 2 approval outcome variables. And for this reason, it would have been difficult or not possible to basically use one mail activity, because depending on basically which path our process would go, we would have had to model one mail. And I will showcase this in a second. So the mail that our applicant will receive at the very end reads as follows. Dear applicant, your request to attend devtoberfest and travel from variable to variable destination has been set to status approval outcome. Thanks for your participation and enjoy your devtoberfest experience. So here you might already identify this as a new kind of data pill visualization that says approval outcome. And you also see here from the context path that it's coming from something that we call custom variables. In the past, as I said, we would have had two outcome variables. So we would have either had to add both, and then the email for one would have been empty, or we would have had to add two mail activities. So what we did instead is, and now I'm just briefly switching to the editable version of this project. So what we will now introduce is, next to inputs and outputs of a process, you will also be able to model custom variables. And custom variables are variables that are globally available throughout your process, and that can be read from any activity and can also be updated from any activity. And the first step in your journey would be to open this dialog, and then you would get an overview of all the variables that you want to handle globally within your process. And then you would also be able to define a new variable just the way you're already used to it. However, let's not spend too much time here, but come back to the scenario. So this is one of the very first use cases that you can take with custom variables, that you can more easily handle conditional logics within your processes. Let me briefly switch back to the PowerPoint as well. So custom variables, why are we going to release them? As I already said, with this, you will get access to more, or you will be able to model more advanced control and data flow patterns within your processes. One of them we already took a look at, the conditional logic. For example, if you have a condition in your process or an approval activity with a merge. And what we will see in a second is that now you will also be able to handle iteration on process activities and data objects. We will take a closer look into a rework scenario between process participants where an activity or information needs to go back and forth. Also, what we're going to see now in the demo is, in case you're having a parallel branch as part of your process, that activities that are using, that map their outputs to a global variable can basically show up-to-date information also in parallel branches. And what this also enables you, and you will see this in an example of a visibility scenario, that again, since we do not need to have separate outputs for each activity, but we can map them into one, so to say, uniquely semantic attribute into a custom variable, this also simplifies and improves the experience that you will have with visibility scenarios and also with monitoring. Coming back to the demo, we will now jump into the German event application. Why is this not? Give me 1 second. I'll just briefly reload. How do I get rid of this? Nope. Okay. Apologies. Okay, now we should be back on track. Now let's zoom into this sub-process and understand what's going on here. So for this made up example, I said, well, every location where SAP employees might be traveling from within Germany to Munich might have their own kind of approval policies. And for the example, we chose the locations Walldorf, Mannheim, Munich, and Frankfurt. So in this branch here, we will be checking in case the applicant is coming from Walldorf. We do have an approval policy where we want to enable a rework, which means this approval will go to someone from a committee that checks the application text from the applicant and then decides if the application is going to be approved immediately or if it's going to be rejected with a chance of rework, which means that the applicant will again get a user task in his or her inbox, provide maybe additional information, and then send it back for again to the committee. Or in case it has been rejected without option for rework, then also this process will end within a rejection outcome. We'll take a look into this later also in runtime. In case the applicant is not coming from Walldorf, but she's coming from Frankfurt, for example, maybe the policy at this location is that there need to be two people or two groups of people in the committee looking into the application at the same time, which is why we have modeled a parallel gateway here with two user tasks. And basically only if both of the user tasks are being approved with a positive outcome, then we will also approve the whole subprocess. Otherwise, we will be rejecting. And basically the two locations that left, we will see down here. In case the applicant is from Munich, well, then there's no travel required to the Oktoberfest. So in this case, we will have an auto approval. And in case someone is coming from the remaining location, then a regular approval will be required. So now I'm coming back to the scenario here where we have an iteration or a rework scenario. So what you will see is that for this approval form, if I navigate into the inputs, that all the inputs of this approval form are mapped to a custom variable. Why is that? Well, because as this subprocess is started, we get in some we get data in, and then this approval process activity should also be mapped to custom variables, in order to work with the inputs. But since we are having here a rework scenario, and this task, if you go to rework, you see the outputs. Here the outputs are also mapped to the custom variables, right? Because so far, that's what I was mentioning with the limitation. On the input of this user task, if we would have only mapped it to the outputs of this activity or of the trigger, well, then the input mapping would have already been occupied, and we were not able to add multiple outputs here. Hence, what we did instead is we defined custom variables, we mapped the previous activities to the custom variables, mapped it to the input of this activity. We did the same here, and then we also did map the outputs of this activity, of the rework task, again to the custom variables, such that there is a consistent data flow between these two activities. Same thing, or the same mechanism we applied here, where we are in a parallel approval scenario. So if we look into the input activity of both these user tasks, you would see that also here the inputs are mapped to the custom variables, and the output, and in this scenario we only have one output, which is an approval comment, is also mapped to a custom variable called approval comment. I think that's important to keep in mind. So if you go back here to the parallel activity, you would also see that the output approval comment has been mapped to the custom variable. As I said, keep this in mind, because during the runtime part of this demo, you will see that one of the user task SNEs will complete the task at firstly and provide a comment, and then you will see that also the user task that's still being opened and assigned will automatically see this approval comment. However, this is only the case because we have mapped the outcome to the custom variable. Otherwise, there would be, so to say, no close to real-time update between those user tasks. That's important to keep in mind. All right. One additional functionality that I wanted to show that is also related to custom variables is you might also be aware of how visibility scenarios are currently being used, or how you might deploy them. For this, I also will move back to an editable version of this project and navigate back into this subprocess. So let's imagine a scenario where I would like to get some business reporting visibility into the subprocess. And for this, I would declare the attributes that I want to use. And in this example, it might be interesting for me to understand from which locations we have the most applicants. So to make the point clear is, let me just close all this. You see, we do have a lot of activities, which makes the whole scenario relatively complex. But here, from the process inputs, I do have information that is being provided from the parent process, what's the name of the applicant, from which location does he or she want to travel from, and some other attributes. However, since the rework task that you can see here again also has certain attributes that are editable, we would also have this the attribute where the applicant is traveling from also here as an output, right? And in case I do want to have my visibility scenario reporting on this attribute, what in the past was a limitation is I had to choose, I had to choose the output of this activity, and I also had to choose the output of the trigger, basically, or from the process input. So let me choose it here from location. Yeah. And with this, of course, you might have different values assigned. Maybe the applicant during the work might have changed the location he or she wants to travel from. But with the help of custom variables, I can just use the custom variable instead of those two attributes. And with this, I always have the most up-to-date information, and I do not need to have two attributes in. So let me just briefly save and show you what this would look like here in design time for a visibility scenario. I'm creating a visibility scenario. And I'm adding the process that I want to work with, the German event application qualification process in this example. And then from the context, you would see that I do have the three attributes in here now. However, two of them are completely redundant. And this is something that in the future, well, with the release of custom variables, you will be able to simplify. All right, I'm switching back again to the deployed version of my process. And now we're zooming out again from this process into the devtoberfest process. And just to refresh our memory, after this process has been completed, the process provides to the parent process one output variable that we call approval outcome, and it's also mapped to this custom variable that has just the exact same name, in order for us to keep managing the context of our process effectively. And then in case this process has been approved, we'll continue with the manager approval. And if it hasn't been approved, we already notify the applicant that the application has been rejected. So now let's take a look into the manager approval. And for this, we have used a much simpler scenario here. So the sub-process is being started. And then the only activity that we have here configured is also an approval task where the manager of the respective employee is assigned, and the manager decides if basically the travel of the employee is allowed or denied. And then this process is already completed. What's new here is if you navigate into this user task, you would see that not the usual SAP Build Process Automation form editor would open, but you basically get a page that gives you the title of your artifact and a manifest URL. What is a manifest URL? For this, let me briefly jump back into the PowerPoint. This leads us to our third feature that I wanted to introduce and discuss with you today, basically your 5-based user tasks. Why did we introduce them in SAP Build Process Automation? In many scenarios, we do see that while focusing on the citizen developer, most of the time there are fusion development teams working together, namely IT and business. And especially if you want to leverage some more pro code like capabilities and features that you would rather find in an application builder, this is something that you can use your 5-based user task for. And you will also see this in a second. And many of our customers already do have some UI5 applications deployed, and there might be also running with pro code workflows. And with this feature, we also enable customers to basically move the existing scenarios from pro code to no code and benefit from all the innovations that we deliver within SAP Build Process Automation. So let's jump back into the system. So in case you want to work with UI5 application, there are 4 essential or high-level steps that you need to follow. You need to create a UI5 application in Business Application Studio. You need to add a namespace sap.bpa.task to your manifest JSON that you will also see here in case I'm using this link. Yeah, so now we are looking at the manifest JSON, and you will also see here that as part of your development process, you need to define the inputs and the outputs and also the outcomes of your user task that is basically wrapping your UI5 application. Just to, again, bring everyone to the same page. When we say inputs and outputs, this is the concept that is already familiar to you. Every activity in SAP Build Process Automation has inputs and outputs. And in the case of user task or forms and approvals, we also do have different outcomes that semantically capture the outcome of such a user task. Jumping back to the JSON, let's take just a few minutes to look into the information that is being provided. Such UI5 application has a version and it has an ID, which is going to be relevant in a second. And if we scroll down, there's some additional information that you would find. But what I want to point your attention to is the following. So you would have this section in your JSON that defines the input of the user task. And here you will also see the attributes and if they're required or not, that you will see that you saw already in the input and output definition in SAP Build Process Automation. So we do have a from destination and the to destination where the applicant wants to travel to, the dates, the travel reason, the employer ID, first, last name, and the costs. And also the same applies to outputs. And you also have a way to define the category of your UI5 application. And at the moment in SAP Build Process Automation, we differentiate between form and approval. So what would you need to do in order, as I said, there are 4 high-level steps. So we just went through 2, creating the UI5 application, adding the namespace, and defining the inputs and outputs in the manifest JSON file. Then you also need to adapt the component JSON and XML file. You deploy the UI5 application, and then it is ready for import into SAP Build Process Automation. How is this going to work? I again need to jump into the editable version of this project. And in case you're working here in the project, you do not only have the option to create artifacts from within SAP Build Process Automation, but you can also import. And in this case, we would choose a form. And then you already see we have the application ID and the application version. That's the information that you already saw here in the header. Oops, yeah, so you need to specify the correct application ID and the application version, and then you provide the information that you always provide to create an artifact in SAP Build Process Automation, namely the name of an artifact and the description that you want to maintain. And once you have imported it, you can add it to your process just the way we did here. Yeah. So now it would be time to jump, so to say, into the runtime of this process. We have already deployed it for the sake of the demo. And as you remember, we do have a trigger form, and then we go through the different sub-processes. So let's just start with one example. I have the trigger app already open. I will fill in this request for myself. And then I'm reading the information that I'm asked to provide, and my application text is by the devtoberfest team. I'm giving a demo at devtoberfest. and I have never been to Munich. It would be great if you approve my request and have fun on site. All right. Then I'm maintaining my travel dates. Let's say I want to travel next week, which is of course now not correct because Devtoberfest is already happening in my session today, but just for the sake of the demo, I'll maintain the destination where I want to travel from, which is Waldorf, and I will be traveling to München, as you say in German, and then I'm adding the travel expenses that I already foresee for myself. And here in the travel form, I do have 3 categories. Travel, I just checked that the train would be around 100 euros. Then traveling back would be 75 euros. And then might have a daily allowance of 25. And maybe I have some other costs that I would like my cost center to cover, which I just put in as 50 as an example. So now I've filled in the form, the submit button is enabled, and I start the process. So the form submission has been successful. If you come back to the process, then logically we would come into the sub-process here. And since I am traveling from Waldorf, we will be here in the iteration part, where there is a kind of rework enabled between the committee who checks the request and myself. So let's check, where's my inbox? Here, let's check my inbox. There should be a user task ready for myself. So you see, now I'm in the role of the committee colleague. I'm checking the information that has been provided to me. It looks good, but maybe never having been to Munich and just giving a session might not be enough. So instead of approving, I want to reject in rework and provide a comment to the applicant and say, hi, Robin. Thanks for your application. Can you please give us one more reason why we should choose exactly you? And then I reject, but with a rework option. Okay. Of course, that's the demo effect, but now the task is completed. Again, jumping back to the model. So now we have rejected with an option for rework, and now the committee should go back the user task. I refresh the inbox, and the committee again gets the information. Now what we want to do is, that's the comment that we've provided. And now I say, okay, hi Devtoberfest team. I'm not only giving the demo, but the information that I want to add as new is I'm also wearing a very cool no-code, low-code sweatshirt for the event. As you can see, maybe. I hope this is enough. There's no other information that I want to change. So I again submit my rework form. And now the committee again gets the information. In case the user cast loads. So I see that the information has been updated that was provided by the applicant. He's promising to wear a very cool no-code, low-code sweatshirt for the event. And I think this is sufficient to qualify. And I say, hi, Robin. Thanks for the additional information. You will travel to Oktoberfest. And with this, we approve. So If we go back to the process, after approval, this sub-process will end. And since we are in this approval branch here, the manager will also get to approve the user task or the travel and the budget for the employee. So going back into this sub-process, what should happen now is that the manager gets a task in the inbox. Let's refresh. Wait a second for the task to load. So you see, the manager has a fairly similar request form. The styling is a little bit different in the UI5 application, but we basically present the same kind of information: employee ID, first and last name, start date, end date, and the travel reason. And now, since the manager needs to approve costs, but also is interested in from where to where the employee is traveling, we added some advanced features that are currently not available in our SAP Build Process Automation forms. For example, here, a geomap where I see, well, the travel will begin in Waldorf and the applicant wants to travel to Munich. That already helps me understand, well, okay, that's interesting. What else? I also do want to get a small cost report based on the categories that I have, so that were provided. So now I can understand that my employee wants to dedicate 50% of the budget to travel, 14% for daily allowances, and then 25% approximately for other items. And in terms of total amount, this is 100 in total. We do have 25, and we have 50 for the other category. And now, since this employee has been working quite well this year, I think I should allow him to travel also to Oktoberfest, and I will approve this request. All right, so now there shouldn't be any more user tasks involved. And then the applicant, in this case myself, should get a notification. And let me just check my inbox. Okay, the mail that I just got. Putting it here. So I received the email and I see, hi Robin, your request to attend Devtoberfest and travel from Waldorf to Munich has been set to status approved. Thank you for your participation. Enjoy your Devtoberfest experience. All right, so that's quite a positive outcome. I think I'm a little bit short on time, but I still want to show one additional scenario at runtime. So let me initiate the request again in a second. And the scenario that I want to show is the parallel approval here for this for location Frankfurt. So I refresh my request form. I type in all the information again. Now I'm keeping it a bit shorter. But now I'm traveling from location Frankfurt to Munich, and I'm just having travel costs. So now I'm submitting this form. And now, in case I selected the right location, we do see that we're now in the parallel or in the scenario where the company policy is a parallel approval. And you see that in both user tasks here, I do see the same set of information that was provided by the applicant, but maybe here the jury member is, first looking into the task and provides an approval comment. Looks good. Approved by department A. I approve the user task here. And what we see is that since we have been mapping this approval comments output to a custom variable, also called approval comment, the approver in this branch also immediately sees the updated information. So all he or she is doing is adding some information and then also approving. And this would complete this part of the demo. What is still left as part of the agenda, let me just jump back into the presentation, is principal propagation. So principal propagation in the end is enabling a sort of single sign-on by forwarding the identity of a cloud user to a remote system. Could be another cloud system, could also be an on-premise system, and it uses JSON Web Token as an exchange format for the user information. So this is what it is. Why should you use principal propagation whenever possible? Firstly, it is providing with a secure or authorized system access, because only users that basically also have access to the target system will be able to update it through the process. And it also keeps your systems auditable, which is oftentimes a requirement for many of our enterprise customers. In case you're looking for some helpful resources, I again listed some down below here. And from what I know, there are also some additional blog posts in the making. Coming back to the demo, I don't think we have as much time, and maybe we should reserve some for Q&A. Oops. So I'm going back again to the editable version of this project, just to explain the steps that you need to do in SAP Build Process Automation. For everything else, we unfortunately do not have sufficient time. So as we already learned, the principal or the user identity can be propagated between different activities. One activity that can be taken or can be executed on behalf of the user is subprocesses. So in this example, let's say I want to start the event application process on behalf of the requester. I would choose the activity, run step on behalf of the configuration here. And since the only kind of activity or trigger that is happening before the subprocess is the process start, I would choose this process start input to say that the identity of the user that submitted the request form should be forwarded to the subprocess. Similarly, we can do the same here for this subprocess. However, most of the time you would want to, as I said, propagate the principle to other systems. So why would I propagate the user into a subprocess? Well, in case you're having an action included in one of these subprocesses, you would need to propagate from the parent process to the subprocess, such that in the subprocess, you again can use the identity of the initial requester for your action. So now, for example, I just want to show you one additional feature in case I'm again adding here the UI5 application, and in case of approval, now I want to add an action. I will just be choosing any action. Okay. Buggy here in our staging environment. Okay. In any case, in case I would be having action here, the interaction would work exactly the same as on subprocesses. So I'm just adding another subprocess here. And now that I have a user task involved on this level of my subprocess, in case I want to say that I also want to propagate the principle here to this activity, I now can choose between the request form, the trigger form here, or the user task that is in front of this parent process. So in case I would want to propagate the approver's identity, I would choose this user task. All right. So before we come to Q&A, I also already want to promote the next session by my colleague Win, who will be introducing event-based triggers that you can also leverage for your business processes. And with this, I think we should have some time for Q&A.
Hello, Robin. So thank you so much for the session. So we have a question from Rarban, and his question is about importing SAP UI forms. Is there any way to import the SAP UI forms and update them without deleting and re-importing, because this could be useful for all those cases where a developer makes a mistake or want to add some properties to the inputs and outputs?
Yes, that's a very good question. So at the moment, the answer for this initial release that we had is unfortunately not. So you would always need to re-import, basically, also with the application version that probably changed in case you did some changes. And then when you go back into your process, travel approval, you would indeed need to remove the activity and add it again. But we are also already in collaboration with our colleagues from Business Application Studio to see how we can smoothen this user flow. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And finally, we would like to thank Robin Kivitt for unleashing the new capabilities of SAP Build Process Automation. They are amazing. It's great that Robin picked the Oktoberfest event approval process as an example, which is very relevant for the season, because Germany, Munich is celebrating Oktoberfest, where we at SAP are celebrating the Devtoberfest in parallel. These are really cool events. So for our attendees, I have a reminder. In order to earn points for this session, you may want to complete the assessment, which is linked to this session. And the link is provided in the description as well as chat box. I have one more interesting piece of news. Registration for the TechEd 2023 is now open. So it is now your time to unlock the world of new trainings and learnings from SAP. TechEd is held both virtually and in person in Bangalore, India. I invite you all to take part and experience it. You can earn 1,000 points towards this Devtoberfest by just registering for the TechEd event. So I thank you everybody for joining this session, and I wish you all a pleasant day. Until next time, your Developer Advocates team. Thank you.